I feel like I should be happier by now. Like I thought I would be happy. Like somewhere in my mind, I thought if I took my medication, I did the stuff, I tried to eat well and, exercise and all those things. I was like, I felt like at this point I should be happy. When somebody gives you that's the piece of advice, like happiness comes from within. I was just like, I don't know what that means. Like I really don't know how to pull it out from within. Made it a thing that I really wanted to study and understand.
You're tuned in to the Dr. Kinney Show, and I'm your host, Dr. Erin Kinney, a naturopathic doctor and speaker dedicated to unraveling the mysteries of your body and guiding you back into balance. Let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Dr. Kinney Show. This week, I'm really happy to have my dear friend, Ellen Wong. She's a naturopathic doctor and chief happiness officer. If you listened to last week's episode, we also had the chief joy officer. So this is going to be a really fun episode. We're going to talk all about happiness, Ellen's journey, and probably a lot of other random stuff. Ellen and I have been friends for a very long time and just one of my favorite people to talk to. And I'm sure you're going to enjoy this episode. Thanks for joining us today. Glad to have you back.
Thank you. Thanks for that wonderful introduction. And you're excited. So excited to be here.
Yeah. And she's going to tell us, she's having a summit coming up soon, the Happiness Summit, which is going to be, I'm sure, amazing. So, but let's chat first a little bit about your journey and how you got to be the chief happiness officer.
And just start talking. All right. So I'll say this. I think you and I both went into medicine because we want to help people, right? Like I think there's like, it doesn't matter what, I know you do a lot with like women's and adrenals and hormones and all that kind of stuff. And, I went into it with more of a focus on anxiety, depression, burnout. And one of the things I sort of very quickly realized, especially with respect to anxiety and depression, is that, you go into a doctor's office, you get evaluated for anxiety and depression. There's no blood test. There's no real, it's a questionnaire. There's some standardized questionnaires that all doctors use. And even if there was a blood test, the ending to this is still the same, which is that when you measure okay on the blood test and you're within that normal range, or if you do the questionnaire and you score below a certain amount, then you are labeled as fine, like you're healthy in medical terms. But what is actually happening is in those scenarios where we test, I guess, within the reference range and you measure very low on those scales, what is really the information what you're getting is actually that you are not meeting that criteria of being diagnosed with anxiety. You're not meeting the criteria of being diagnosed with depression. It doesn't actually mean you're healthy, right?
Yeah, it doesn't mean that you're like actually happy.
Yeah, you're just the absence of anxiety and the absence of depression. And I went through a really, really rough time years ago. And you know this. We've had lots of personal conversations around this, but like I was disowned from my family, in a relationship that the person was a good person. The relationship was hard because it was rescuing me from having been disowned. Right. And so it's a really tough place to be in. And I remember suffering a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression. And I remember, as naturopathic doctors, we had lots of tools, there's supplements, there's diet, there's all sorts of things that we can do. And when you're anxious and depressed, you can only do so much of that. And because it's just so debilitating. Yeah. I remember seeing my conventional medical doctor. I had anti-anxiety medication. I had antidepressant medication. And those were really helpful because it got me to the point where I could actually do some of the things that you and I know so well to do. And, the dietary stuff, the supplements. Anyways, long story short, I remember I was feeling fine. It was fine. And I went to the doctor. And at this point, we had already started weaning me off medication. And I remember the doctor being like, oh, okay, like same questionnaires, do the thing. And then they're just like, and he was like, oh, you're great. And I remember being like, well, I'm not great. I'm okay. And he's like, what do you mean? And I was like, well, I feel fine, but I don't
feel joyful and happy and fulfilled and
healthy. Like when we think of the word healthy, the image that comes to our mind is typically someone who's like energetic, vibrant, like, they like ready to take on the world. Not like in the sense where you're like rah, rah, rah going, but just like there's a level of radiating sort of this energy that feels really contagious and happy and like, like that energy. I had none of those things. And I remember trying to explain to him the difference. And I mean, to his credit, like you don't learn about this stuff in med school. So he was like, no, but you're fine. You're good.
And I'm like, fine. You look normal. You check in within the normal limits. You're within normal limits. You're
good. You're good to go. And I was just like, and I remember saying like very distinctly to him, I feel like I should be happier by now. Like I thought I would be happy. Like somewhere in my mind, I thought if I took my medication, I did the stuff and like, I tried to eat well and, exercise and all those things. I was like, I felt like at this point I should be happy. And he looked blank. Like he was kind of like, like,
what else can I do for you?
Yeah, he's kind of like, and he just like threw this line at me, which he was basically like, well, you know what they say, like happiness comes from within. And he literally said that. And he was like, okay, like book an appointment with me if you feel like you need medication again. And I remember walking out and like just kind of going back to the apartment at that point that I was sharing with my partner at that point. And I just remember sitting down on the couch and being like, what? Like, what does that mean? Like, it just, when somebody gives you that's the piece of advice, like happiness comes from within. I was just like, I don't know what that means. Like, I really don't know how to pull it out from within. And I remember then thinking, so if this is the advice everybody else is getting and they're actually happy, what's extra wrong with me? Why can't I pull it out from within? Like, what is missing within me? And like, I remember like literally that day where I was like, do the thing that everyone does when they have a question, which is go to Google and like I literally typed in the question, like how to be happy. Like, what does it mean to be happy? And the answers that came were, it wasn't helpful. It's just, it was generic. It was like, try a bit of this, do a bit of that. And like, it's fine. But then like, it just didn't feel like it was enough for me. Like I felt like it was scratching the surface. It didn't go as deep as I wanted it to go. And so from there, then forth, like I really just made it this thing that I really wanted to study and understand. And so I did do a lot of research. I read a lot of the publications, if you will, around happiness and from a scientific perspective, what makes us happy. And then I took a lot of courses and training from real like experts and leaders in this field who teach at Harvard and Yale, and like they're like sharing what they know about well-being and happiness. And then when I did that, then I discovered that there were countries around this earth,
like Bhutan, right?
Yeah, countries around this world that measure really high on the happiness scale. And then I was like, okay, if they consistently measure so high on that world happiness rating, why are we different in North America? So I traveled to a lot of these countries to understand their culture and experience what it meant to be happy. And you're right. One in my research, actually it was my husband who brought it up to me. He was like, oh, there's this place that like, it's called the happiest place on earth. And we were going on our honeymoon and trying to figure out where we were going to go. And I thought he meant we were going to Disney World because it's the happiest place. It was not, in fact, Disney World.
It was not Disney World.
Yeah, it was not Disney World. And he was the one who introduced me to this country, Bhutan. And a lot of people haven't heard of it. And it's a very small country. It's in the Himalayan mountains. And what was really interesting about them is that they use something called the Gross National Happiness Index.
So cool.
I know, that actually measures happiness. And it wasn't an index that they didn't make it up from nowhere. They actually like hired people who researched happiness. They hired people who were statisticians that understood how to put together a rating scale like this, an index like this. And they created this happiness index, which they sort of use like, in Canada, we have a census. I don't know what you guys have in the States. I don't know, something similar, but like that's what they actually use to measure. And it's like they measure this idea of happiness. And I was like fascinated by this concept because I wanted to understand like what that was about. So I read into the index. I like looked at, and some of the things that, were obvious, and some of the things really stood out for me were different than how we think about happiness. And so then we traveled there because it's one thing to
read about it.
Yeah, it's one thing to read about it. It's one thing to say you have an index about it. but then like actually does it get lived out?
Yeah.
And so when I went there, the first thing that I noticed was that they just don't live at the same pace as we do. And I see this in the Nordic countries too, that rank really high every year on that happiness scale. Like they just live at a different pace. Things are slower. And like in Bhutan, they have projects, like they have buildings they need to build and things they need to do, but they actually just care. The government just actually cares about the people and how they are living more so than they care whether the project of building the building is done being built by the deadline. And it really it just is a different mentality. We went there and the first, I mean, for context, they are literally in the mountains, the Himalayan mountains, and every road is a road that swerves around a mountain. They don't have banners lining all of these roads. And so it is obviously dangerous to drive when it's wet and snowy and whatnot. And so every time there is a snowstorm where, especially if it's like the first snow of the year where there's like snow on the ground, everything just gets shut down for a day. The government it closes for a day because the safety of its citizens is more important than rushing and getting something done. And it's like, I mean, in this day and age where everything is about progress and everything is about how much you grew from the year before, it's a really refreshing take on life.
Yeah. Yeah. And that it's okay to just be. Mm-hmm. Or I sometimes have days, and I'm trying to not have as many days as this, where my long patient days, and I'll come home and I don't have much transition time. And lately I have therapy at the end of one of these long days. And my therapist is always like, how are you? And I'm like, I always pause. I'm like, I don't actually even know yet because I've been going at such a pace all day. I don't know. I have to stop. And I recently was like, can we push our call back 15 minutes so I can just stop and take the time to assess, am I happy? Am I sad? Am I anxious? So, I think in our culture, we're constantly moving so much that sometimes we don't even realize what we're feeling because we just are moving on to the next thing.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting. I think sometimes we build a life where we move on to the next thing so we don't have to feel our feelings.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. It's a matter of presence. And I remember that day the second or third day we were in Bhutan, there was that snowstorm. That's how I learned about how everything shuts down because, I mean, it's interesting. Like as a tourist, when all the restaurants are shut down too, you're suddenly like, wait, I don't understand where I eat. Like it's just it's interesting because immediately you feel inconvenienced. Immediately that gut reaction is like, what do you mean you shut everything down? Like, how do you guys function as a country if you do that? Yeah. It's immediate. It's judgmental. And it's taking our culture in North America and trying to implant it in a place where that actually doesn't matter to them. Like, they're basically like, we're not going to let you starve. We're going to bring you. They literally were like, go back to your hotel. We will bring you food. Like, they did. And
so crazy.
Right? Like, they did. But like, they just weren't going to be like, oh, because of tourism, we need to keep this up. They're like, no. Yeah. They're like, no. And it's almost like a little bit like almost like a self-assurance kind of thing. It's almost like this is how we live here. So if you're going to visit us, you're going to have to embrace a little bit of what this is about. Right. And then what happened? So again, like I think in my mind, I'm like, if we had a snow day, most people would, especially adults, would then now have to stress out about the fact that their kids are home and there's like no one's watching them and they're trying to finish work. Everything's like an inconvenience. Everything's like frustrating. It's chaotic. It's hectic. Or if you also happen to have a day off, then it's like, oh, I'm just going to sit down and watch TV and like that kind of stuff. I remember that day they didn't have to work because, I mean, the country shut down because there was snow. The adults were on the street having snowball fights with other adults. Yes.
They're on there playing. That's so fun.
Yes.
No wonder they're so happy.
And that's the thing. It's like, in our culture, would that be a thing that we would do? And the answer is no. And it's not because they don't see snow. They see snow frequently enough. But it's like, they are actively on the street throwing snowballs at each other. The kids are involved. I'm watching people like run into their house and bring out umbrellas to be like the shields against these snowball flights, like flying across the street. We're still on the street because we're, I guess, like still trying to go back to the hotel, and I forget where we were heading to, but like the driver rolls down the window to like shout at a friend who is now like, and then they lob a snowball into the car and they think it's hilarious. And like, I'm just sitting there sort of absorbing this whole thing. And it just, you're like, no wonder they're happy.
They're just enjoying being human. They're just enjoying the spaciousness of having the day off. So it's like, oh, we're going to have a snowball fight.
The next day we were climbing up to Tiger's Nest, which is a main attraction there. It's like it's this beautiful monastery that was built in the 16th century, and it's really high up on a mountain. And so I remember like it's a day hike. So we go up, and our tour guide randomly just lies on the floor and makes a snow angel. And he's like, "Can you take a picture for me?" And I just remember being like, again, culturally speaking, I feel like if that were to happen in North America, we may label this person as being unprofessional, as not taking their job seriously. Like, I'm the customer. You're supposed to be like taking care of me. You just lay on the ground and made a snow angel. But like, that is their culture. And I remember asking him, I was like, you do this hike day in, day out with like groups of guests, all people, everybody who goes to Bhutan climbs to this Tiger's Nest. And so I'm like, how do you feel doing this like day in and day out? And he's like, I love it. Because he's so present in the moment. He's like, every time I climb, I do this walk, I notice something different. I see something different. I feel something different. And he's like, look, today there's snow, so I'm going to make a snow angel. And you're just like,
that's amazing.
Like the energy in that, how can you not be happy?
Yeah. Well, I wonder, could someone be like, do you think, like, I wonder, what did you, in your research, did you find, I mean, obviously they have to have some percentage of people that aren't happy, but I wonder, like, is that like a serious like mental, like what would be causing someone to be living in that country and not feel happy?
It's a really, really good question. I think obviously happiness has like its ins and outs, and I think there's a lot of like, nobody's happy all the time, right? So we all have our ebbs and flows.
Yes.
I'm willing to bet there's people there who obviously like they're human, so obviously there's people there that are like depressed or like have bad mental health seasons, even if you will.
Yeah.
I just think that they have a lot of support around them to make this better.
Too.
So if you think about if this is kind of the environment that you are in and people live in the sense of community, and they really do, like they really support each other. And, there's tons of stories around this. And it's like, maybe even if you were feeling a bit depressed or having a really hard time, maybe you have resources to tap into that just feel different. And like, it's a really good question you brought up, because I was looking into this. And so bringing in a bit of that clinical background, I looked into the countries that actually have the highest antidepressant use. Because like, that's interesting. Like, how would I correlate this?
What countries were they?
Interestingly, some of the Nordic countries were the ones that had. So then I started being like, wait, so like, that seems like a discrepancy, right? To me.
Yeah.
So
because like they're higher in the happier countries as well.
Exactly. So what happened? What is happening there? So there's a couple of things that I mean, getting a bit nerdy on this right now, but like,
I love it.
First of all, like if you're measuring antidepressant use, you have to have access to antidepressant medication.
Oh, that's true.
So that's the first thing. So immediately the countries that didn't have high antidepressant use, you could see some of them just actually have drug shortages.
Yeah.
You have drug shortages, you're not using it, right? So we have to remember that antidepressant use is a measure of the fact that you have access to medication.
Yeah.
One. And two, you have to go ask someone for that medication.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Which means your
have
culture.
Support. Yes.
Exactly. And your culture has to be open enough to talk about it. So what I started realizing is that there are some countries that have very low. So like Korea and Japan, I think are two that I remember immediately. It's like their antidepressant use is very low. Their suicide rate is very high.
Ah. So there's not, and where were they on the happiness scale? Were they
not high? They're like kind of midway. But like you have to like think about that.
There's
it's like
support. Yeah, that makes sense. Like in that culture, like it's like, no, I'm going to isolate myself. I'm going to go by myself.
Yes. Because it's a taboo thing. A lot of Asian countries, like you don't really, you don't really talk about this stuff. So it means that they're not seeking help. So then I went back and I looked at the research around the fact that the Nordic countries do have higher antidepressant use. And it's interesting. It's because they talk about mental health openly. This is not a problem. You are free to seek help.
Yeah. It's just like having heart disease or diabetes. You need to go talk to someone about it. Talk to someone.
Their method of healthcare and their measuring is that they get antidepressants, which means that they have access to antidepressant medication. They also, interestingly, because they can talk about it, because they can get help, and because they get help, they actually receive the medication and it's subsidized by the government, depending on which country you're in, they actually feel like the government supports them.
Which probably makes them happier in general.
Correct.
Because they feel more connected to their community, country, whatever.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Isn't that interesting? Like, it's so interesting to me. Like, and it just goes to show, like, I feel like happiness has a lot of facets to it. I'm not great at explaining this yet because I feel like I need some words to talk about it, but I actually don't think happiness is the opposite of depression.
No, I would agree with you on that. I mean, would you say joy is the opposite of depression?
I don't know what word it is, but I feel like
we might not have it in this language. I'm sure there's another language that has a more like defined,
because like
or niche word.
Depression is a set of negative emotions that you spend more time in.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and there's so many. I just released an episode a few weeks ago about depression. It just was my personal story. And I just thought there's so many facets to it. And there's like the mental health part of it. There's the physical symptoms you can get. It's a lot more than an emotion, I feel like. Right. It's isolation is a piece of it. There's so many pieces to becoming depressed. I think sadness and happiness are opposites, but you can be sad and not be depressed.
Yes.
Right. Like, and I think of depression as like when someone's depressed, they withdraw, they isolate, and they're not seeking. I know when I've been depressed, I typically I'm not seeking community, and that's part of the problem. With depression.
Yeah.
So
I know it. Like I agree. Like maybe there isn't a word for this yet because I just don't think they're two sides of the coin. You know what I mean? Like it's not like there's people who are on antidepressants as per our conversation around the Nordic countries. Like there's people who are on antidepressants and they're still feeling happy. Oh yeah. And then there's people who are not on antidepressants and not feeling happy. You know what I mean? Like it's just this, I don't know. I agree. Like I don't think that there is a word because I think happiness is, it's more than just positive emotions, right? Like there is like a whole slew of things around happy. Like we actually know that things like trusting your government and trusting your community raises your happiness levels. And this is like a really there's like a, what's the word? Iconic picture around this in the Nordic countries where there's like a restaurant and there's just like a ton of baby prams, like baby strollers, and they all have babies in them. Wow. And the parents are inside the restaurant eating.
Just leaving the babies there. Because they trust that like no one's going to take their baby.
Because that's what happens. That's how much trust they have. Like any parent listening to this would be like, I am not leaving
their baby. Some parents might be. They might be like, yeah, definitely let me leave the baby in the stroller.
But like, I don't know if you do that in Toronto, if you do that where you live, Erin.
Oh my gosh!
Police is getting called, right? Like,
I'm like almost embarrassed to admit this, but I had someone call the cops on me. I left my 7-year-old daughter in the car for about 6 minutes while I ran into FedEx in my Tesla that I can control. Someone called the cops on me. I had social services at my house. No joke. Yeah, it was a whole thing. I had to hire a lawyer.
Oh my gosh.
And my daughter was like, Mom, like, I'm just watching a TV show and this guy came up and knocked on the window. Just like a whole, but just to show that like, I could see the car. I was running out. Anyways, that's a story for another day. But just shows like how non-trusted. Clearly this person thought like I was a bad mom I felt like a horrible parent for a while because I was like, oh my God, what kind of parent does this? And now I've got all this. But at the end of the day, I was like, well, I felt okay leaving her in I was comfortable anyways. But yes, so no, you would never leave your baby in a stroller in America. No. And it was just a row of strollers. Everyone left their baby sleeping outside because there's that whole thing too. Like they actually believe babies should get lots of fresh air, lots of sunshine. So they like left their babies outside. They all went inside and ate. And like it's okay because no one's going to take your baby, which is a level of trust that I can't actually embody right now. Like I don't know how to feel that way. But I could imagine if you did feel that way about the people around you. How good that would feel. How it probably would feel good. Yeah.
I feel like life would feel pretty good.
Think about like what that does, again, I don't have any experience with feeling that way about government or, about the US, but I feel like what we do know for the nervous system, if you're in a trusting environment, even just, with a practitioner or with your friends or you relax. But if your nervous system is like on guard, if you think, I'm not being cared for, I'm not trusting the environment that I'm in, that activates your fight flight. And when you're in fight flight, the happiness doesn't really.
No.
You can be happy when you're in sympathetic mode, but I don't know. It's more excited. I feel like in that happiness is more when you're in the calm, like when you're in flow state.
Yes.
And maybe that's like part of when we're trying to find this word opposite of depression. Like I feel like depression is like you've shut, like the nervous system has shut down. Right. And like when you're, and there's like that level, and then there's like super on, fight flight level. And then we want to be like in that flow, like easygoing state.
Yeah.
Which again, we don't really have a word for that.
Yeah. I feel like flow captures it a little bit.
Yeah.
But you're right. Like there's another word that needs to be like birthed
You're gonna
into
have to
existence.
coin this. You're gonna have to coin this word with your happiness summit.
Find something here.
Find the word.
Because it's
Create
like,
it.
It's true, right? Like happy. Yeah. There's a smile. Sure. But it's an energy. Like there's a thing that allows for someone to both feel and express that energy.
Yeah.
And I think, this really is kind of, I guess, my mission, really. Like, it sounds corny to say it like this, but it's really like, I want to capture that and I want to help people experience it.
Yeah.
Because like one of the things that like when I'm a super like logical, like systems based person. And one of the things that I wanted to like look into is actually like what actually is the point of being happy? And I'm not saying this like it's like some, what
what does it do for us physiologically, mentally, like emotionally?
What is that? To use business terms, like what is that return on investment? Like what is the purpose of being happy? Like why do we care so much about being happy? And so when I looked into this, there's actually quite a bit of research. Like people who are happier are healthier. They make much better life decisions around lifestyle stuff. They're more resilient. They handle stress better. They create better relationships. They are more productive. They are better problem solvers. They're creative. They're more compassionate. They're more likely to give back to the world. They have a much better quality of life, however we measure it.
Yeah.
And we may even live longer.
Yeah.
Like there's just, it's almost like
that seems extremely high return on investment, right? For yourself, for the continuing of the species, because you're going to be a better parent. You're going to be, again, you're providing more, you're contributing more to society when you're happier. So that means it's helping society as a whole.
Yeah.
So and if you're creating, it's definitely beneficial.
And if you're creating healthier relationships, like we know how crucial relationships are, not just for our like personal well-being, but for like just advancement of anything. Like when we advance as a human species, most of those big advancements are done in relationships and teams. Mm-hmm. And so like, it's almost like I used to ask myself like the question. I was like, well, why is it important to be happy? Now I'm almost like, why wouldn't you try to be happier? Right?
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. Like I said, I just recorded right before this an episode with someone all about joy. And we were talking distinctly about the differences between joy and because joy is like the in the moment, like the little like, oh, this brings me joy. And it's like almost like, the same side of the coin as gratitude. Like I feel like happiness is the more like long, almost as depression, although we still agree it's not quite the right word, but happiness is like, I feel like when you're like, I'm happy, it means you're happy kind of in all buckets of your life. Versus joy to me is like, oh, I'm going to blow bubbles and that's going to bring me joy. Or I'm going to do something little and small and it brings me joy in the moment.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have a different thought on that.
Again, like these are such hard words to like describe. So the closest I've sort of come to this is trying to describe it. I don't want to say layers because I don't think one is deeper than the other, but they're like facets, like almost like a Venn diagram. And so to me, like there's the idea of pleasure, which is something we seek. And that is totally important. Like pleasure in all, whether it's like whether it's like sexual connection kind of pleasure, or like you find pleasure in like eating something that you love, like whatever, like there's a certain amount of positive feelings that come from that. And to me, pleasure is like a sensation. Yes. It's like a thing you kind of feel. Happiness to me is like an experience. It's more of like a longer, like everyday kind of like you said, like it's that like happy middle ground almost, like that like feels good. Everything's like smooth and flowing and that kind of thing. Like that to me is happy. I think joy is almost like, it's like a state of being. It's like you're in the moment. You're like you said, like I feel like this burst of like, not necessarily excited energy, but like elated energy. Like, you know what I mean? Yeah, so it's so hard to me to describe them all, but I do want to say, like, I think all three of those things are important. I think you do need
I think so too. Well, I'm just thinking now, I feel like you can be, because I've had moments in my life where I've been probably clinically depressed, but able to like have a moment of joy, like watch a funny video and laugh and like feel joy, but would not say that I was happy.
Right.
On the whole, it was like, you know, the majority of the day was in the depressed state, but like I could have moments of fleeting joy. Right. And I feel like happiness is almost like
it's a state. You're right. It's like it is a state.
And joy is like a little fleeting. And but I think joy is a good way to, I feel like joy is a good way to access that feeling that gets you close to happiness.
Yeah.
Right? Like, don't you think is a joy practice something that you would recommend for someone who's like trying, like, it's got to be one facet of happiness?
Yeah. I think it's all, and this is why it's so hard to describe, right? Like there's all these things and we all experience them differently. I mean, like, sort of the way I've created it, like I've tried to create a framework around this because I actually do think that there are things that we can actively do to experience all those facets, right? And so when I designed this framework, I called it the 9 pillars of happiness. And the word happiness is the acronym for all the things that I think we need to attend to feel that state of flow and ease and smooth and just kind of like vibrant and like happy, really, for a lack of better word. And so the word happiness then stands for the H is for health, because I really do think like we need to manage our health and our energy if we want to feel happier. A stands for authenticity. Like, are we living a life true to ourselves and what we want, even if it's different than what other people tell us we should want? Yeah. Right. The first P is purpose. So like, do we have a sense of purpose and that we're contributing to something meaningful in our lives? The second P is productivity. This is something that I learned in Bhutan. Like, productivity is not about how much you can do. Like, it's not about like doing the most you can in the shortest amount of time. It's really about controlling your use of time and feeling like you have control to use your time in the areas that matter to you, right? And then the I stands for inner peace. I think it's really hard to feel happy if inside it's all turmoil, right? I feel like inner peace is really important. Yeah. The N stands for nature, and that's, you know, fairly self-explanatory. The E stands for emotional intelligence or emotional mastery. Like, are you able to master your emotions? Not in a way where you don't feel the negative. It's like, how do you navigate the negative emotions that we are bound to experience on a day-to-day basis, right? The first S then stands for social connection. And we had talked about this before, like not being withdrawn and being present and connected with people that matter to us. And then the last S is sustainability, which is again something I learned from Bhutan. They focus a lot on sustainability on a global level. So like actually contributing to the greater good of the earth and living a sustainable life. But then I also think that there's a personal element to this, which is like the things that you do, the decisions you make, the behaviors, the actions like that you're choosing, are they sustainable for you in the long run? And to me, for all the high achievers listening to this, you don't have to nail every one of those pillars. You're not going to. No one scores perfect on every pillar. And that will, obviously trying for that will also make you unhappy. But the idea is that I always feel like on the moments or the weeks where I'm like, I feel like I'm not as happy as I would like to be, I always go back to these 9 and I'm like, which one can I work on? Like, which one do I want to give attention to? Yeah. And you get to choose, because there's probably more than one that you feel like, you know, but then it's like, there's an element of choice. There's an element of like, I'm going to come back to pay attention to one of these pillars. And I know that if I attend to them, I will inevitably be happier.
Yeah. That's awesome. So I have to wrap up because I have to jump on another. I'm going to teach here in a minute. She and I chatted too much at the beginning of our call. We're going to put the show notes, but can you tell everyone a little bit about the Happiness Summit? They can sign up. We'll put the link so they can sign up. Yeah. And when is it? It's starting March 20th?
Yeah. It's starting on March 20th. It runs through the week and it's free to register. But if you want access to the video, like if you're worried about not being able to dedicate a whole week to it, I totally get it. Lots of people working here. There will be an opportunity to get lifetime access to the set of videos and interviews that I'm hosting. And the reason, I mean, people have asked me like, why did you make it free? And I was like, I really want to get the word out there. Like to me, happiness is something that everybody wants, but we don't talk about how to actually feel it or create that in our life. And I really want to spread this message of making happiness practical. Like there's actual ways to do this and there's ways to sustain it. And it's so important. So let's talk about it more.
Yeah, I love it. Well, thank you for continuing to do this awesome work. And We'll give you guys the link so you can sign up for the Happiness Summit, and you can go follow her on social media. She has all kinds of great content about happiness and all the things we chatted about today. And thanks, friend. It's great to have you on.
Thank you. Good catching up.
All right. Bye, guys. See you next week.
Thank you for tuning in today. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to connect with me on social media and leave a rating and/or a review. This helps grow the show so more people have access to this knowledge that leads to empowered healing. Love and light, and see you next week.